New York never sleeps. The city glows with a blur of strangers, noise, and lights. But look closer and you start to wonder, in a place so full of life, how do people actually connect? Somewhere along the way, America went from being a nation of communities to what sociologists now call a community of individuals. Jane Jacobs once conceptualized healthy urban life as grounded in encounters among diverse people sharing the same streets, shops, and gathering places. But lately, something has been changing. The easy conversations, the familiar faces, the sense that the bar down the street is a second home, all of that feels like it is slipping away. Here, I will argue that in New York's evolving nightlife scene, bars can serve as barometers of urban community health, revealing how organic neighborhood anchors are being transformed into commodified venues. Over the course of a month in New York, I visited many bars in both Manhattan and Brooklyn. What I found was a city split between two trajectories. On one side, the community-rooted bars, referring to neighborhood anchors where bartenders know regulars by name, patrons become regulars, and where strangers become friends. On the other, a rising breed of establishments optimized for turnover. Places built less for conversation than for circulation, curated for the camera more than the community. Through this, I noticed the fundamental restructuring of community formation to become an increasingly engineered phenomenon rather than a natural byproduct of city life. In this documentary, I explore three core ideas. I begin with the continued community role of traditional bars in acting as vital social infrastructure, before delving into the forces of commodification threatening that function. Finally, I illustrate how this tension allows bars to serve as broader signals of neighborhood change and urban life itself. To set the context, this transformation is occurring within a broader decline in informal socialization. From the 1970s to 1990s, Americans have reduced their visits to bars, taverns, and nightclubs by nearly half. People have been increasingly choosing to grab a bite and run, rather than to linger and socialize. While sociologist Ray Oldenburg once referred to these everyday spaces that facilitated connections between strangers and fostered community bonds as the great good place, my study has found that this ability to find casual belonging has struggled to keep up. Amidst the decline in social interactions mentioned previously, community-rooted bars continue to function as vital social infrastructure by fostering what sociologists call progressive familiarity, with a gradual transformation of strangers into regulars through repeated encounters. These spaces operate as networks of reciprocity, thriving on mutual obligations that build reputation and trust between patrons and staff over time. Each interaction, such as conversations with the bartender or a familiar face at the counter, all reinforce a subtle social contract grounded in repeated patterns of behavior over time within the same social settings. Emery Hall along Broadway Street exemplifies this dynamic through its regular game nights for the New York Knicks, where the bartender leads cheers, bringing together NBA fans, students, and families. Between plays and timeouts, the in-house DJ plays music that continues the upbeat atmosphere that encourages intermingling between patrons. Through these repeated, low-stakes interactions, each visit to the bar serves not as an isolated interaction, but as part of an ongoing relationship where trust, memory, and belonging gradually develop. These are key ingredients of what sociologist Putnam calls social capital. In this manner, community-rooted bars preserve this temporal depth, resisting the broader shift toward individualism by anchoring the casual, recurring exchanges necessary to hold neighborhood life together.
She goes, "Oh, let's just have raw sex then."
Next, community-rooted establishments promote informal social connections through deliberate spatial design. Urban sociologist Richard Sennett stresses the value of spaces that exist at a distance from intimate desire, need, and identity, as individuals can interact freely without the pressures of being performative. In other words, design shapes behavior, and in bars, the layout itself can invite or inhibit sociability. When spaces become too curated or aestheticized, individuals may become hyper-aware of how they appear to others, reducing authentic engagement. Many community-rooted bars counter this through layouts that invite casual, low-stakes encounters that nurture trust and recognition. At 1020 Bar at Amsterdam Avenue near Columbia University, the positioning of its pool table and couch for movie screenings brings students who might arrive separately into the same conversational orbit. Similarly, at the Heights, another student bar near Columbia University, there is a mix of standing and seated tables packed closely, such that movement across the space becomes an act of social navigation, inviting spontaneous interactions among strangers. These designs promote circulation across groups, transforming physical proximity into social opportunity, lowering the barriers for social engagement. With this, the perceived stage for performance is removed, and individuals are given the opportunity to escape the oppressive burden of being performative in social conditions as raised by Sennett, promoting community formation. Therefore, through this sense of familiarity and designed architecture, community-rooted bars excel at creating what Putnam calls bridging capital, linking people across demographics. Even as many newer venues strip these conditions away, these neighborhood bars still manage to nurture organic community. Having examined the role played by community-rooted bars, we now turn to the pressures undermining them. I've identified two main causes in particular for this shift from community anchors to commodified venues. Firstly, driven primarily by social media's involvement in public life, fundamental changes in business models have led many bars to prioritize higher turnover. Putnam mentions digital media's role in separating social connections from physical interactions, creating an illusory sense of engagement where the line between being with people and just feeling connected with them is blurred. This illusion of connection extends into the bar itself. Inside many of New York's newer venues, the experience isn't about conversation anymore, but about self-presentation. It is about capturing every moment online, with every neon sign, drink, and corner designed for the camera through aesthetics or gimmicks. When the social value of the space shifts from interaction to visibility, patrons no longer gather to build relationships, but rather to simply perform them. I visited Cafe Bellarica in Brooklyn, where its neon lights were immediately visible through its windows, advertising its party atmosphere inside. This seemed to function less as an invitation to linger than to attract passers-by seeking spectacle. But when everyone is focused on performing the experience rather than living it, something gets lost. Interaction is disincentivized as patrons already feel socially connected through online sharing and may see little reason to engage with those nearby. The message is clear. What matters most is not who you get to interact with, but what it looks like you are doing. Patrons come, post their stories, and move on. Few return, and even fewer remember the people sitting next to them, preventing repeated encounters with the same group of people, which discourages communities from forming. Next, cultural gatekeeping disguised as inclusivity is another subtle exclusionary mechanism causing bars to shift toward commodification. Many newer venues attempt to be spaces where everyone belongs. But look a little closer and you start to see the cracks. What looks like openness hides a new kind of gatekeeping. One built not on who you are, but on how well you fit the aesthetic. Here, belonging is defined less by shared practices and more by the exclusion of those who do not conform, where those who can perform belonging better through fashion, cultural fluency, or participation in a specific visual language are the most welcome. Take House of Yes in Bushwick, Brooklyn, for example, which markets itself as radically inclusive, yet through its unspoken dress codes, aesthetic requirements, and themes, filters out those unwilling or unable to integrate. This creates what Sennett terms pseudo-communities, where participants only hold a fragile belonging contingent on signaling the right aesthetic or cultural markers. In such spaces, community no longer grows from shared experiences, but from shared optics. As such, the conditions necessary for building the trust from long-term reciprocity are replaced by spectacle, preventing genuine community building. With this relationship, bars serve as signals for broader neighborhood change as they often follow a familiar trajectory, where community-rooted spaces give way to hybrid pioneering venues that are slightly curated before being finally replaced by fully commodified venues. On the surface, this might seem like natural market evolution, where neighborhoods grow and tastes change. But beneath that, something deeper is happening. What we're really seeing is community being engineered into spectacle, where exchange value overtakes social value. This reflects what economist Joseph Pine refers to as the experience economy, where bars are reconfigured to serve experienced consumers rather than community members. These bars prioritize curated experiences designed for social media consumption over community building. As a result, when community-rooted establishments disappear, it often signals more than just changing consumer tastes or rising rents. It also reflects a broader erosion of social infrastructure, where the capacity for spontaneous, local connection is replaced by curated, transactional experiences. In this sense, tracking the evolution of a city's bars allows us to follow the health of its communities themselves, with their capacity for bringing strangers together amidst an increasingly commodified landscape being brought into question. Ultimately, the evolution of New York's bar culture tells a larger story of how cities themselves create and sometimes lose the spaces that hold us together. Community, once something that emerged naturally from shared time and place, has increasingly become a design choice. It now requires intention, investment, and a deliberate resistance to the pressures favoring commodification over relationship building. The bars that endure as true neighborhood anchors survive not by chasing trends, but by protecting the conditions required for sustained trust and familiarity. From this, how then should we approach this decline in urban community health? In a city increasingly driven by turnover, perhaps belonging has become less about permanence and more about the fragile moments we choose to make meaningful. Perhaps the first step is simply to stay a little longer, to talk to the stranger beside us, and remember that community begins with a conversation.